Yeah, thanks, Candace.
All right, well, this is an intro, post-intro. I don't know, we've been chatting for like 5 minutes or so, but like, hey, everyone. It's good to see everybody again. I see a lot of the same names that have been taking advantage of this. So we're excited to have you guys once again joining us for Rural Life, the Virtual Summer Institute. Welcome to Read the World, Rethinking Literacy for Empathy, Action, and Access. I'm Candace Herman, and I'll be your session host. And I'm here to support the session presenter, who I'll introduce again shortly, offer technical assistance to participants, as well as share the session evaluation and certificate information at the end of the session. Please don't hesitate to use that chat if you need to, if you want to ask questions, or if you need any kind of technical support. And at this time, I'll introduce you to your session presenter, Kristin Ziemke.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. It is great to be with you. Thank you for coming, Dara, Lori, Shauna, Mandy. Awesome to have you guys here. Since it is a small group, please feel free to unmute at any point in time so we can be interactive and have some conversation, or just feel free to ask any questions, because with a small group, I would love it to be like at the end, you have all your questions answered and that you're like ready to go with what you need, because I know we all are entering this at different places and have different specific needs. So please feel free to interrupt at any point in time. Let me know like where you are and we'll go from there. I'm Kristin Zemke and I teach here in Chicago. I am in the car today if you just joined because I don't have internet access. It all went out in my building and I couldn't connect to the hotspot on my phone. So I was like, okay, like don't panic. What can you do? So I'm in the library parking lot and I am stealing their Wi-Fi. And here we go with that. So I think, you know, part of being a teacher in 2020, as we all obviously have learned, is being flexible and having the ability to adapt and adopt to whatever learning conditions we find ourselves in. Anytime that we're working with students, I think it's so important to remember, like, this is modeling. You know, like even behind a screen, we are modeling for students how we react to situations, how we handle change, how we address social, emotional, and mental health. And so we know we do this all the time in the classroom, but it's just so important to keep reminding ourselves that this piece right here is modeling too. And so instead of being, if I was with students, instead of being upset, I would just be like, oh my gosh, you guys, here's what happened, right? And I'd be like, do you think I did the right thing? Like, is this working well? What would you do if you were in this situation? Because I think the most important thing we show them is actually what we do when things don't go according to plan. And I think I've like learned that over the last maybe, 7 or 8 years, especially as I've been embracing more technology into my practice, is that it's how I respond when things don't go well that is like the really, truly important piece. And that might be the most important things that we do teach them as we're coming off a school year that was faced with adversity and change and challenge. And so anytime I'm messing up, like in class, face-to-face or online, I'm just naming it and saying like, oh, that didn't go well. What should I do instead, right? And like, that's part of how we're really immersing ourselves in this space where I'm a teacher and a student. And every single person in my classroom is a teacher and a student as well. So on any given day, we have 30 plus teachers and 30 plus students. And I think that's, where we set up and see great learning happen. So today we're going to talk a little bit about new literacies, what we need to know in order to be effective digital teachers, because a lot has changed in a very short amount of time. And it continues to change as we go. So I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about that with you guys. Please feel free to interrupt at any point in time. I'm going to go and just share my screen really quickly here. All right. And There we go. So if you've been with me before in this, you probably already heard me say this, but I think when we went to remote learning, there were so many different technology options out there and so many tools that suddenly became free that we were like, oh, should I try that? Should I do that? What about this thing? And in an attempt, like we knew we needed to do something, we tried a lot of different things. And I think now we're going into it knowing so much more than we knew at the middle of March. And we're looking through this lens of, okay, it's not about the things, it's about the teaching, right? And the relationships and pressing pause on all the things and really looking to simplify. What we have going in to next year. And I think the easiest way to simplify and to streamline some of these things that we have access to now, is to keep going back to our students. Like every single conversation needs to be, what are kids showing us they need? What do we know they will need in order to engage deeply in this next type of learning? And so when we position kids at the heart of all that we do, then we know we're making the best decisions that we're able to in any moment of time. I have a new book out and it's called Read the World, Rethinking Literacy for Empathy and Action. And as my writing partner Katie and I looked at technology and how we've used technology for the last 15 years, we've really seen that technology is not about like the shiny fancy things you can do, but that the best way to use it is to help kids tell their stories. Every student has some type of story that is worthy of living in the world and having a voice and a place for it to live. And so if we can use tech to help kids tell their stories, that's a win. Once we work on telling stories, then we're more aware of the other stories that are also around us. So we look to give kids the opportunity to hear stories of others, right? People like them and people not like them, whether they be in the next town over or around the world. One of the great affordances of tech is that we can connect. And then in hearing the stories of others, we hope that kids find inspiration to take action on some type of issue, right? Whether it be engaging in, right now we've got so many examples with the Black Lives Matter movement, kids addressing climate change, global health, all of these different things. And even if you're 5 or 6, you can do something to raise awareness, to advocate for a cause. And so we create this mindset of possible. Peter Johnston is one of the people I always go back to because he has done such detailed work on the language we use with learners and how we give them this mindset of agency, meaning this belief that's ingrained that like I can do something whatever I set my mind to. So I'm the kind of kid that can start a campaign online. I'm the kind of kid that can make a movie of my life story and share that with the world. I'm the kind of kid that can, like fill in the blank with it. But we're looking to create this agency across the board with students. So just a couple little things to think about there really quickly. Before we get too far into this, I think when we're working in online, there are a couple tools of the trade that we need to be mindful of and to have with us. And I think one of those tools of the trade is like some type of paper, right? I just grabbed a little notebook this morning as I was heading out of the house, but most time I'm just writing on blank paper with students. But when I have some paper like this, I can hold it up and model for them right there, right? Like this becomes my hand writing under an overhead projector or a document camera or even like an anchor chart for students of all ages. The other piece that's really important to have are some, bright colored pens that show up really well when we're writing and holding something up to a camera. Pencil is not the best tool for that. So we're thinking about, okay, if we're going to be writing in front of kids, what might we use? Excuse me. And then the last piece is I would have some type of book within reach because I think it's so important if the technology fails or if the lesson doesn't go as planned, I can pick up something, whether it be a class read aloud, an informational science text, something where I can say, okay, instead of wasting this time, right, or instead of just, spending 5 minutes to figure out the technology, let's just go back to a book and do some thinking around that. And so my typical rule of thumb is, like, if it isn't working in a Zoom call or online format with kids in like 3 minutes, then I'm shifting, because we only have so much time with them, especially when we're remote learning. That I'm saying, okay, let's do something else. This is not your fault, students, that it didn't work. This is on Miss Z. So let me work on it and we'll try again the next day, right? So just having a couple tools of the trade, I think, is so important. And instead of fighting things, if it doesn't work, go into the next thing, because we can work on comprehension and deep thinking strategies in many different ways, right? It doesn't maybe have to be the way that we plan the lesson to go, but we can ask kids to infer in a read aloud. We can ask them to determine the most important information in a poem. Anything like that is a good adjustment. So let me go back here and go a little bit deeper with you guys. So when I'm talking about this comprehension piece, I am really looking at some tried and true practice. And this is where I think Katie and my work has always been about the pedagogy, not the technology. And so holding on to that pedagogy that matters, and that being these key pieces. First, David Pearson's work on active learning. It was first called active literacy, but now updated to be active learning. And this is about learner engagement, right? David Pearson and Associates found, like, back in the 80s, that the learning experience in schools in almost every subject was very passive. Kids either listened to a teacher lecture, sometimes they took notes, they listened to a teacher read, maybe in like science lab, they got to do some work, but most of it was passive learning. And so Pearson said, in order for students to really comprehend the information, retain, and then the most advanced, being able to reuse that information, they need to go deeper. So make sure that kids are like turning and talking every couple of minutes. Make sure kids are drawing and writing to annotate their thinking. And then slowly we look to like fold in another layer of this active learning piece, so that in doing so, we're teaching in a way that is engaging the multiple intelligences and learning styles. And if we provide more options, then we're more likely to meet the different student learning styles in our classrooms. Also, kids can go deeper with their thinking when they access it in a variety of formats. So we're holding on to that. We're also looking at Richard Allington's work on reading achievement. And back in the 70s, Allington did this study that's been repeated so many times. And he found that there are 3 principles to reading achievement: volume, the more you read, the better reader you become; choice, in the titles and text that you have access to; and then the opportunity to respond for real and authentic purposes. And so we think about, okay, how are we providing all of this to students? We're also looking at tech that way too. How are we giving kids lots of time to use the tech? How are we giving them choice in process and product? And how are we giving them opportunities to respond in a way that mirrors the real world? And I think this is something I've really been thinking about the last couple of years, because I look, as I've been in school buildings across the country, and I've wondered about what is the type of work that lives in school versus the type of work that lives in the real world. And I think oftentimes we ask kids to do a type of work that only lives in school buildings and school settings. And I think if we're just checking ourselves and saying, is this work that could live in the real world? What are we asking them to do that might be useful moving forward, but more importantly, be something that they can use as a model for real world instruction, right? We know our tweens and teens are watching video all the time, reading social media, creating TikToks. What can we ask them to do in school that looks like the actual media and multimedia formats that they're seeing when the school bell rings in their daily life, whether it be publishing an ebook or posting a blog, like all of those things they get to see. So I'm hoping that we can move our schoolwork in a direction that will be things where kids have these great mentors all around them that we're embracing and using in school too. And then I think the big pieces for me go back to my mentor, Stephanie Harvey's work on strategic reading, and the way she breaks down comprehension really addresses these 6 different practices that all good thinkers employ. And you employ these practices in science, in social studies, in the arts, right? Also in math, like you have to connect to your background knowledge in math in order to think about what strategies you'll engage in order to do this deep thinking work and solve a problem. So we're always going back to, like, when I ask kids to do something or when I'm planning, I'm always thinking about what evidence will I get that they're using these comprehension pieces in the work that they do. And so when we look at updating our pedagogy, this is a great piece from NCTE. They just released in November a digital learning position statement, and it opens with this, right? And we know that as the technology continues to change, literacy will continue to change, because now we have so many different access points into the reading and thinking experience. And so we're going to redefine, revise, and refine our thinking about literacy rapidly in the next couple of years. And so what I want you to do next is, maybe if you have a little piece of scratch paper, or even if you don't, you can maybe do some writing in the chat. But what I wanted you to do was just think about the past week and make a short, quick write list of all the different ways you read across the course of that week. All right, so whether it be email or a book for enjoyment, just make a short bulleted list. And if you don't have paper near you, feel free to write in the chat. I'm going to do some writing too. So let's just take 60 seconds quick write and make a list of those things. Maybe just 10 more seconds. All right, pause. If you could just for a second, just hold up your list to the camera so I could take a quick look at it. Awesome. Oh yeah, captions, books, resources online, Google Slides, children's books, recipes, yes. Oh, excellent. Email, yep. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for engaging in the writing and for sharing it. When I'm with students, I'm doing that all the time. Like, just hold it up, right? I might not get to see everything that they've written down, but I can typically see 1 or 2 things from a couple students and then name those pieces. Like, you guys had recipes and captions and all of those different things. So instructional moves. I asked you to draw or write your thinking because this was a moment where you took a break from the screen, right? So we always ask kids to have paper and pencil or marker with them, because I wanted you guys, if you had paper, to look at that paper, to do some physical movement activity, writing things down, and then to come back to the screen. And so when we're planning lesson rollout, we're looking for ways that we can make it multimodal, even when we're behind a screen, because we know that this screen can become very passive and like you can zone out. So we're structuring for kids' brains to have those breaks and those different interaction pieces. If students didn't have paper, right, just like Pam did, She jotted her ideas in the chat, and that's okay too. Like jotting and writing in a chat is also writing, but we just look over the course of time that we're with students to give them a couple of different options, right? And I think when we look for, you know, writing that happens in a chat, so many times I look at that as like sneaky writing, right? Where I'll be like, all right, everybody pause, take a moment, just write like 2 thoughts you had about that portion in the book. Write it in the chat and then post it, right? And so if we give kids opportunities to write in very small, short chunks across an instructional sequence, then chances are, like in a quick literacy lesson, maybe they wrote 2 or 3 sentences. And if they write something in science, that's another 2 sentences. And if they write 1 sentence in math, that's another sentence. And so very quickly we see like, whoa, they wrote an extra paragraph of text during the school day. You know, and we think about production and fluency development by giving these short bursts of writing throughout the thinking and learning day. This is something that we would do in class too. Like, yes, it works for remote learning, but we could do it in class on sticky notes they could be writing. So frequently my students have their devices open like this, and I'm using some type of chat room like Padlet or even Google Sheets or a Google Doc for kids to post their comments and write and respond. And this way of doing this like micro writing is a very easy way to build interaction. Kids know how to do this because they're texting all the time, right? So when we respond and create these short opportunities to write, now because they're texting all the time, this might be a follow-up mini lesson on digital conversations, right? And like an anchor chart of how do we use digital conversations in class, or a written conversation, right? We used to do this on paper and pass it around the room and everybody responds. Now we're doing it in an online fashion. But digital conversations might mean like no text talk, right? Example, TMI, LOL, you know, like those things. We just name it and put it out there. And this is like in response to what we see them do, right? Don't use capital letters, kids always say. It makes it feel like you're shouting at people, right? And so we just make a quick anchor chart of our do's and don'ts for when we're having a written conversation online. The beauty about something like this for me as a teacher is that in class, when we're doing it, I can go around and like listen into conversations or meet with small groups as kids are writing online, but it also gives me the security to have something to go back to and look at after the lesson. You know how sometimes we're in the lesson moment and we're like trying to assess and make sure everybody's got it, that we don't really have enough time to see the thinking that's taking place. When I have a written conversation like this, I can go back to it after the lesson and be like, oh yeah, I didn't know that Lori said that. You know, I wasn't like at her small group when they were talking about that, but that's a good point that we should come back to. So just strategies that transfer from our remote time back into the classroom time. Because I'm anticipating moving forward in the school year, we're gonna have some time in class and some time away. And if we give kids tools that they can use in both settings, then they don't have to like relearn or free up brain space every day to be like, what's she gonna ask me to do today? They'll just know like the simple strategies that we use in class and that we use in an online space. Questions about that? All right, cool. So I'm going to share a couple more things with you. Please feel free to interrupt me at any point in time. All right. So we named a couple of these things and you guys had them on their list, but we used to just define reading as stuff that we interacted with that was print. But now we're reading so many different pieces and really expanding our definition of reading. And as we look at like books and materials that we physically handed to kids, we still say like yes to that. Like, yes, we're giving you informational texts and books and maybe like firsthand artifacts. And we're leveraging all the great digital tools that we have access to as well, and really just expanding the number of resources that we have. It's not that the digital is going to replace the printer paper, it's just that it's going to give us additional options. And so that's why I think like now is the best time to be a teacher and a student, because we have more options than ever before. And so as Katie and I wrote our book, we really looked at, okay, what are some of those new pieces, like art? We need to slow down. I think back to, maybe 12 years ago, where we're in a No Child Left Behind era, and like when I was teaching kindergarten, it was like the new third grade. And I remember even times that we'd be like, keep going, like don't slow down with the pictures or with the art on the page. And we didn't take enough time to teach or analyze that. And so now we're looking at art. We're looking at those short bits of writing that you guys just did. We're thinking about body language and video, and even things like virtual reality, and teaching kids how to slow down, right? Like if a text box pops up in virtual reality, pause and take the time to read it. Have a notebook or a clipboard next to you and draw and write your thinking as you go in that context too. So we're really just looking for these new options and housing it under an umbrella of reading. If we use the same language across the day, then kids can apply those strategies in just about any context. Excuse me. So when we think about reading today, a couple pieces that we need to know. Smartphone ownership has gone up dramatically across the country. And when we start looking at our tweens and teens, just in that 4-year period, going up about 20%, 25% across the group. Now we know that kids are very good at smartphones. We also know after our COVID time away that they can't do everything on smartphones, and just having a smartphone also doesn't mean you have high-speed internet access. But it's an interesting piece to notice and note how kids are interacting with devices online. I thought this was so important, how kids use device by socioeconomic status, and that tweens that come from lower income households are on device much longer than their higher income peers. So it's just something that we're thinking about, right? I also thought it was incredibly noteworthy that when we look at doing homework, kids from higher income families have some device at home, Chromebook, laptop, tablet, that they're frequently working on. Kids from lower income homes are more times than not doing their homework on their device. And so I think that that really begs the question, like, are we teaching them how to use these devices in order to get to the tools that they need to use? So, excuse me, I started to think about it. I hadn't modeled for my students how to use Google Slides on my phone. I hadn't modeled for them how to save to drive on my phone. And when I found this study, I was like, oh my goodness, like how am I expecting them to do these things that I haven't taught them how to do? So lots of just quick mini lessons in class or instructional videos, where I just like this, held up my phone to my computer and showed kids how to do those pieces that they would need to be successful when working from a smartphone. So when we talk about any print that is on a phone, the general category is e-text, is the technical name. But what's been really interesting from Ann Magnin and Sugar and Sugar's work and Lotta Larson out of K-State has been they have done a ton of research on interacting with information varies on the interaction format when we're talking about a device. So if we're asking kids to read a website, that's a very different style of reading than reading an ebook. An ebook is a very different style of reading than reading a blog or a social media feed. So we have all these different nuances for the format of what we're reading. But then what they also found is that the experience varies by device as well. So as I'm reading on my laptop, that's one type of reading. If I'm reading on my phone, that's a whole different style of reading because everything's so much more compact, and I think about a lot of times when you open a website on your Chromebook, that looks very different than when you open a website on your phone. And so giving kids strategies for both is really important as we try to grow their ability to access knowledge. When we talk about reading on a device, we're just like device reading, screen reading, right? Yet when we talk about reading in paper, We have countless different genres, and each genre has specifics and nuances for how we interact and read that genre in order to deeply comprehend it. And so I think it makes sense. You know, we've been revising and refining our mini lessons for books and print and informational text for years and years. We need to do our due diligence and really think about what online mini lessons we're providing kids. And I think so much of this online lesson development comes from like classic Yetta Goodman kid watching. You know, we're teaching them, then we're really watching what they do and how they respond, and having that like all the time experience of being like, oh, I didn't teach them how to access the information in that format. So let me do that as a quick mid-workshop share, right? Or that's what I'm going to teach to launch my mini lesson tomorrow. So we're really looking for that feedback loop to happen on a regular basis with the digital text. Anne Magnan, who has done so much work in this area out of Norway, and she is definitely like the key researcher to look to. She has summarized her results of 2 decades of work to now believe that reading is so complex these days with the number of formats and devices that we have, that it can't just be studied in ELA time. It has to be taught in every single subject area across the thinking and learning experience. So for example, in science, we need to teach scientific reading, which is very different than reading a mystery. And we also have to teach how to do that on a device, right? In math, we need to be explicit about digitally reading math information that's on a device and craft and create strategies for kids to use in order to do that effectively. And so when we think about technology, right, we're going back to that yes and approach, right? Like, yes to all these fabulously rich things that we did in a print-based format, or maybe before our classrooms got so digital. And we're saying we can do it this way and then add on some technology elements that make the experience more robust and accessible for students of all ages. And so the accessibility comes from features like text to speech, conveying information via videos, using rich images to build background knowledge, and then to provide information in like multi-touch books or formats. When kids are reading a multi-touch book and can look up a word right in the book, they could press something and hear it speak to them. They could watch a video that's embedded to get more knowledge. Those are all tremendous tools that we have access to in 2020, but we need to do the work of teaching kids how to use those pieces. So I'm gonna take a pause there and invite you guys to come off mute and just react. There's a lot of information there. What are you thinking now? What questions do you have? What wonderings?
Kristin, I hadn't thought about that data about different socioeconomic groups of students and what devices they were trying to do their schoolwork on. You know, in my mind, I just kind of picture every kid doing it like my kid does. And we're blessed, you know, to have a family computer, and he would just sit down and, you know, with the laptop and do his work. But I can't imagine him doing some of the stuff he was asked to do that last 9 weeks of school on a phone.
Mm-hmm. I know. And I think I thought about it like kids are doing so much on phones, and like that's awesome. And I know I have students that choose to like type an essay on their phone. But I didn't think about what it looks like when that's the only other option, right? Like I was kind of thinking about it like, oh, you had a device you could take home, or you choose to use your phone. But I didn't think about like how tricky that would be if the phone was the only tool.
I agree, Bethany. A number of our students couldn't access the information or download the programs we were asking them to use on their phones. And then we had, it was difficult to convince my teachers that just because a student has a computer at home doesn't mean that they have access to it. Mm-hmm. For example, one of our students, I teach high school, their brother came home from college, and suddenly mom and dad are working from home. The brother is at home. and everybody's trying
Right.
to use one computer, and it just wasn't working for them.
I think that's like such an interesting piece. We had kids that were turning in homework at like 1 a.m, middle school students, 4 a.m. And our middle school teacher quickly like looked at the turn in, on Google Classroom and was just like, what? Why are you turning this in? And the child had said, well, because my mom needs a computer to work all day long. And then my younger, right? Like kids often sacrifice for their younger siblings because they're also taking care of them. My younger siblings need to do their work, and it's the only time I can get online and get my work done. And that was like that moment where, as teachers, you have those moments in life where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm the worst teacher in the world, because we just hadn't thought about it, and like maybe that onus is on us, but like this was an experience we hadn't thought about. And so of course that teacher said like, oh my goodness, your health is way more important than the schoolwork that we're doing, like thank you for overseeing your younger siblings work and that sort of thing, but like you don't have to do that, like you can join our class meetings when you can. We'll give you credit for like managing the education of your younger siblings, because essentially like you're being the teacher, and of course you are learning a ton from that too, that maybe is not measurable on a rubric or via a GPA, but like I think it was a huge learning experience for all of us, and like just being mindful of the number of devices that families have access to or can use in any of those situations or settings is kind of shocking and eye-opening for us, I think. Other thoughts?
I like the part talking about that sneaky writing and like getting in those little micro bursts of writing.
Yeah.
We can use the same text that we want them to use independently, that we can have that at their fingertips during the classroom time.
Right.
Have a tablet open, have a Google Doc open, have some kind of tech like that open right there. And so that really helps kind of bridge that gap. And we're there to like give that support if they need it, and then they can do it on their own. And thinking about showing them what it's going to look like on a phone. Just like going back to what Bethany had said, that I hadn't thought about, that so many of them probably were doing that work on a smartphone. And just, how easy is it to pull it up on your phone in class and say, so this is what it looks like on your screen. If you're using a phone, it's going to look differently, and this is what it's going to look like.
Exactly. And like, talk about like old brain thinking. Whenever I have to do something that's like tricky or hard, I always am like, let me go open it on my computer. I'll get an email that I need to address something to. I'm like, let me go to my computer so I read this really well, right? Like that's because this is also how I grew up on something, right? Like kids might have a different preference, but we know that like a lot of times it's just easier when you have a bigger screen and can see it. So the complexity, that goes into like really creating something on here, especially when it's visual, is so tricky. I often thought like if I had to use a phone like as my only tool for a week, that would break me, and like I think like just even having the empathy for what that might be like makes us so much smarter as educators in this response option. The other thing I was going to say, Mandy, about like the micro writing is like it's a great archive of what happened during that class period too. So in a situation where maybe like a student was absent or they got pulled out for something, you'd be like, start by reading the written conversation that your friends had, and then we'll catch you, you'll be all caught up tomorrow, after you see some of these discussion pieces. We have a class Twitter account as well. And so during this time when I'm teaching and learning, we have daily archivists where kids will like type and tweet what's happening in the learning out so that we do have a record of that. And it's been surprising for us that so many of our families now are following like our Twitter account to get a glimpse into what's happening during the school day so they can have conversations about it at home too. So just lots of new opportunities for engaging kids thoughtfully.
Kristin, let me just interject this. If you have a school that has Google accounts, and if a teacher's using Google Sites, for example, there's a preview tool that will show you what it looks like on a phone, a tablet, and a computer. So you can see the website that you've created and how it would look from a student perspective using those different devices, if that makes sense.
Yes, and that's a great example of it. So much of what we did was we just created classroom websites for, classrooms, and kids went to that website to access all the information and work that they needed to do. So having that central hub was really, really helpful for students. But like John is saying, as you make this site, it will show you how it lays off all in different formats. And so when I've been modeling for students what this looks like, opening a Google site in edit mode and then showing them, so here, let's notice these differences. Here's what my information looks like on a computer. Here's what it will look like on a phone. Like, what challenges do you think phone users might encounter? What do we need to know as phone users? And that becomes like our mentor tech is what we call it. Like, we know like mentor text works for showing kids reading examples and writing examples. And of course, when we move into a digital phase, we need mentor tech that will allow kids to come and to use that type of information in a highly effective way. And so I think, these pieces of engaging and using the Google site is so wise. Thank you very much for bringing that up and sharing that information. Okay, so let me share my screen again. Let's see here. All right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what this looks like with classroom use or distance use, right? Like, we could craft something from a distance that kids can use to really build these thinking practices. So thinking specifically about reading images, video, text, all of those things. So I'm going to ask you guys again to unmute, and I'm going to show you an image in little bits at a time. And so oftentimes, whether it be reading, science, social studies, math, we're introducing learning with some type of image study. And so we use the language of, what do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? And so this becomes those sentence stems for students in order to interact and think a little bit deeper. Excuse me. It also gives them that familiarity of, when I show you a graphic or image, you immediately go into this thinking mode, and they don't have to, like, again, free up brain space to be like, what's she going to ask me to do today when we look at this thing? We know, right? So as you're unmuted, can you guys maybe just share a little bit? When you look at this, what do you see? What do you think? And what do you wonder? So take a look at that first image.
Smoke and then wonder where it would be coming from.
Yeah, right. So the smoke, that's a piece of text evidence, right? Like, that is right there in the text.
Power
yeah,
line down looks like two.
Oh, so now that's making me think, like, did the power line fall down and then that's what started the smoke? All right, keep thinking and wondering. What do you see, think, wonder now? I definitely see fire now. So that's making me think, is it a forest fire?
And then seeing the power lines makes me wonder if maybe it's an accident on a road instead of just more out in the wilderness.
But it looks like the fire goes deeper down into the picture, like maybe whatever has happened is spreading quickly.
Oh yeah, you're looking at like the faded fire under that, like up close fire, right? Like the fire in the background. I love the thinking too. I never thought about until you said this, but like the power line signal, like maybe it's near a road or something. What do you see, think, and wonder now?
Volcano.
There's lava, right? What do you see, think, and wonder now?
How am I going to get home?
How am I going to get home? That's awesome. Right? But like, when we slowly like do this, and typically we would have kids in class do it in like a turn and talk, right? Online, if we had a small group like you guys are, we could do it this way. We could also have them just writing in the chat, right? If we wanted to do, Mandy, another one of those sneaky writing things, just go ahead, see, think, and wonder. And I could only see a couple of your faces, but typically what happens is that when people see that first quadrant of the lava on there, they go like, oh, yeah, you know, like that moment of comprehension when your body shows you like, oh, I get it now, that it's all coming together. And so like that would be an opportunity for us to cue kids in to their physical responses to emotion. Excuse me. And when we think about these physical responses, right, this happens all the time to us, like eyes wide up when you're like, oh, like that's startling or scary. Or when we have that circle mouth, that's when we're like, wow, oh, awesome. And so if we're listening really closely to how our body responds, that will cause us to stop and really pay close attention, right? So check this out. You guys are totally right. Here's that road paralleling the power lines. It almost looks like there's buildings in the distance, like where those backfires used to be. This is a photo of that road from Google Earth. And then, of course, this is what it looked like. Pardon me. So we think about using images to build background knowledge, right? So now maybe we would look at this. Right? What do you see, think, wonder in this photograph? I think that seems a little too close for comfort. Kids are always like, are those people in the background going to like fall off a ledge or fall off a cliff? Like one of my favorites is that kids ask like, what was this golfer's priority? But then middle school students are starting to really catch on and be like, this seems photoshopped, right? And so we can say, what do you see that makes you say that? Right? Like the people are at different levels. There's no way that you would be allowed to golf and be that close, right? So we start bringing in that digital citizenship conversation too. And then we look at something like this, right? And like almost always the very first question kids have, how fast is the lava moving? Because they're concerned for her safety, right? Why is she wearing a gas mask? Is it dangerous there? And this becomes a real easy way to build empathy, right? And to have those conversations. Pardon me. So when we look at these, we think about using images to build background knowledge. And when I go to images for learning, these are my favorite sites. The Learning Network has a great, let me show you this really quickly if I can get my internet up. The Learning Network has a great site that I love called What's Going On in This Picture. And every Monday, the Learning Network and New York Times post a thought-provoking image like this one. And I think I shared this in my inquiry session if you were with me there. But here they post this image, what's going on. They guide kids to walk through some of those visual thinking strategies, right? So you can see here, students, look closely at the image above. What's going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? What more can you find? So it like hooks them into all of that standard based language of key details in a piece of visual text, right? The best part about this site though, is they don't tell you what's going on into this picture until Thursday afternoon. So of course, like gratification delay is awesome with students. It really hooks them into the thinking. And then on Thursdays, they have the reveal, right? So this is a great place to go. I also love, they have what's going, yeah.
I'm sorry, real quick. We're just seeing your slide.
Oh, so sorry. Hold on.
That's
So
okay.
sorry.
Maybe just how it was shared.
Yep, let's see here. Let me just
it
go
might be
back.
worth pausing just a second so people could see exactly what
No,
you
totally. Thank you so much. Can you see my screen now, the Learning Network?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the same thing, right? So what I was showing you when you couldn't see it, my apologies, was this site, and they post all of these different types of images, and then they have the big reveal on Thursdays, right? So every week of the school year, they have all of these great pieces. They also have what's going on in this graph, right? So when we think about graphics, a hugely important piece of new literacy. We've often dismissed graphics thinking it's pictures and like we'll gloss over that, but it's all math and science data sets. And so teaching students how to read these and be thoughtful about it is very important. We also know that like graphics have historically been on the math portion of the SAT. what we now know is that with the update in 2016 and 2017, they now are showing graphics in the ELA portion of the SAT as well. So, so much so that kids have been asked to read a piece of informational text and read a graphic and then compare and contrast the two. Right, so we know as things like start with the older kids, it will trickle down, and this piece of graphic literacy is going to be super important moving forward. The other site I love is Photos for Class, and this is just an image bank of resources of all different things that can be reused via Creative Commons license. So if you type in something like volcanoes, right? I can find photos on volcanoes. Hopefully it will load up. But the coolest part about it is that here are my volcano choices, right? I've got all these different images. Let's say I download this one. All right. And then let me see if I can open that here. So here's my image that I, as a teacher, can use in any presentation. Kids can use in presentations, put on their blog, post to social media, and look at right here at the bottom. Can you see where it builds in the citation? Like everything that our teacher librarians have been working on for a decade now is like already built in. But more important than it being built in, it's a reminder to kids of practicing digital citation, right? And giving credit to pieces like images and art, which isn't often modeled in popular media. All right, so let me go back here. So we would start with this image study to build background knowledge. Super helpful for kids that have any type of learning support need, language need. Then we would go back into our study of volcanoes and say, okay, now let's look at these graphics. Right, going back to that graphic literacy piece, so much information in these two small images that we could spend unpacking and modeling for kids. Which way do you even read that graphic? Do you start at the top? Do you go to the right? Do you go to the left? Right, like all these different things we need to know to comprehend. As we move forward, we look at video as a huge affordance for kids. And like, yes, they access video all day long, but like, have we taught them how to use it as a tool for thinking? Like, have we taught them to pause and annotate that video just like they would a piece of text? Have we taught them how at the end of a video, there is so much information. Many times you need to go back and reread that video in order to get all the information. What they found is that videos at times can contain up to 50 times the amount of information as a piece of text. And that's because it's layered, there's sound communicating, there's text overlays, there's graphics. But I want you to take a look at this video really quickly and see all the different features that you have to attend to and comprehend in order to understand this video. So let me see here, make sure we're shared right. Perfect. Okay. So take a look at this and pay attention to all the features that you see. All right. More on volcanoes. And let me know if you can't see it for some chance.
The eruption of a volcano can be one of the planet's most destructive events, spewing huge amounts of rock, gas, and ash that can kill people, cause crops to fail, disrupt air travel, and even alter the weather. But not all eruptions are cataclysmic. Some are a lot quieter and far less deadly. There are many types of volcanoes, but all are cracks in the earth with a chamber of molten rock or magma underneath. The hot magma is lighter than the surrounding rock, so it rises. As it does, gas bubbles form, increasing pressure. The magma starts to flow, taking the path of least resistance. Once the magma reaches the surface, it's called lava. If the lava is thin, the gases will bubble out easily and the lava will flow quietly. But if the lava is thick, the gases will cause it to erupt explosively, creating boulders, cinders, and ash. Some volcanoes have a collapsed central section, called a caldera, that can act like a plug. As the magma flows elsewhere, the caldera may sink until it cracks and the magma has a new path to the surface. Then the volcano can literally blow its top.
All right. So did you guys see all of those different features in that short little video segment? That was 1 minute and 34 seconds. And so when we look at the amount of information that was conveyed in that little clip, it only makes sense that we have to go back and probably watch it again, right? And take notes about that a second time because there's so much in there. And so we have to start teaching this just to make sure kids are aware and observant of this piece as well. So we're thinking about how we're going about and sharing this. We're thinking about how we're teaching this. And then one of the strategies we would also use is to teach kids to go back and take another look and make a list of all of the words they need to understand in order to get volcanoes, right? So now they're building their own word wall that's a content specific word wall that they can then research, use, look up, and find those words that truly convey information from them. And then of course, we're gonna say, all right, we're doing volcanoes now. We have books for this. Let's go back to some of those books and really think about what we could learn. And then many times we organize information for students in one place. Here was an inquiry into bottled water from multiple perspectives. And we put the websites that kids would need in order to find more information right on a Padlet site so that they could just click instead of doing an open internet search, click and find really useful information. And when we're thinking about the places that we guide kids to go, we're really thinking about this idea of mentor tech, right? Like, where do we want kids to go beyond just Googling it to find information, especially in a setting like when we were doing distance learning and maybe students were on devices that didn't have some type of filter. But like my go-to places are just really quickly, and when I'm thinking about lesson planning, I'm constantly going to this website. It's my favorite of all time. The kids should see this. Almost 5,000 videos that are 3, 4, 5 minutes in length, right? Like that's something that's changing in a digital age. We don't watch, the whole 30 minutes of some type of science or reading rainbow video. Instead, we watch short chunks that are really powerful and impactful. And 9 times out of 10, I can find whatever I need on this website right here. And what I love about video is that it doesn't care about your Lexile or your guided reading level. Like all kids can think and interact with video. The other site that I love is this one called Wonderopolis. And it's a blog of the day about science topics. But what I teach for tweens and teens is to use this as a search engine. Because if I search volcanoes on Wonderopolis, look how many things come up. 26 different posts about volcanoes. And as I click each of these posts, I'll get to read more about it and find out that there is a text-to-speech. There are some guiding questions to focus on as I'm reading. There's a video built right in that they could use for additional thoughts and typically some images. And then here's all this information right here that will expressly talk about a magma chamber. So just thinking about a couple of those like key, easy places to go. So when we think about just a little walkthrough of volcanoes, was it a science lesson? Was it a literacy lesson? Was it a multimedia content lesson? And we see how we can like bring all of these things together to make learning experiences robust, but also engaging for kids, right? You just layer in those different images, videos, graphics, and then some type of micro writing. And that's a great structure to use for almost any lesson. So I'm going to stop there and open up just the last little bit for some questions or comments. What are you guys wondering? What questions do you have? Oop, Lori, I think you're on mute.
I was thinking about the how to integrate the videos if we're in a distance learning and our kids can't download. How are we going to manage integrating some of these different really cool resources in a distance learning environment?
Yeah, I think like that is something that's a challenge where there isn't high speed internet service. And so one of the things that would be another good resource for that, some type of ebook library would be a good resource for that, because that would have the things built in but not needing to be downloaded, like a presentation or a slideshow. I think another thing that we could use for this would just be really high on graphics, or you could send the direct link, which would just play it straight from the internet, which would be a little easier of a processing and speed lift than like a direct download for kids. So if you like structured it, look at these. So say you had like Google Slides, right? You put 3 images, then you would maybe put a link. Click and watch here, and that would be the volcano video. Then they would come back and do something, might be a strategy. But that is something that everybody's concerned about right now too.
Our kids are almost all rural and do not have internet access. So
Yeah.
we're being asked to create assignments that can be downloaded, like a weekly bulk download, and then they can work from home. And so that's where, the images would be easy to integrate into that, but I don't know that the video, that might be something that only some students could do.
Yeah, and if like, are they going to like a common site for that weekly big download and then using throughout the week?
Right. So the basic idea is for each of us to have set up our syllabus on Google Classroom where they can download a week at a time.
Yeah. So I think you would just plan for that in advance too, and have them like, I know some schools are like inviting kids at different times to the school parking lot to connect to the Wi-Fi to download a week at a time.
Exactly.
So you would just have to plan ahead and put that all in there before they did the download piece. So it's just a little more planning.
Right.
But like maybe if you did that download piece at school, then if kids like did have a phone or something, like that would be an opportunity to use that written conversation piece. Like as you're watching the video, add your thinking. And then it's also sneaky reading, because when they go to that written conversation, they go back and like read all the things that their friends posted and read, but then it does feel a little bit more interactive. So I think it might be okay, but you'd have to plan in advance.
Yeah.
Good question. Other thoughts? All right. Awesome. Well, I hope this was helpful. Thank you guys so much for sharing your time with me today. And please make sure that you do the evaluation at the end. Thanks for being such troopers too for my first car webinar. You are part of my story now that I'm going to be telling for the next couple of days. So, thank you guys so much.
Thank you again, Kristin. Yeah, I feel like there are at least a few people in this. Like we're all in the same tribe now. We've had at least one Zoom meeting from a parking lot. I know I've done it from a school and a grocery store, so you're not alone in this, girl.
Yeah.
I like what you were saying earlier, real life examples. So
that's right. We're doing it, right?
Just to echo what she was saying earlier, thank you guys again so much. Thank you for your active participation in this as we're wrapping up this last week of our Virtual Summer Institute. I've already dropped that link in the chat. If you guys will, when you get to, take a chance to go ahead and complete that. It gives you all a chance to reflect on your thoughts, because we're always wanting to improve wherever we can. And also it'll give us the chance to collect your information if you are interested in a certificate of attendance. So John, if you're still around, I believe this closes the evaluation. I think it closes like 30 minutes after the session. Is that correct?
That's correct. It'll close about 30 minutes after. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So thank you guys again. I think a couple of us might hang out for a few minutes in case you do have any questions, but thanks again for